Session of the Salt Lake City Council for Tuesday, November 24th, 2019. We have one item on our work session tonight, and that is an informational presentation about the 9th South Ramp Feasibility Study Update. So, Russell, if you want to introduce us to this, and then John Larson and Jeff Golden, if you want to come up to the table. Thank you. Russell, whenever you're ready, you can jump right in.
To be brief, this is an update of a technical study about the feasibility of what to do in the future with the 900 South freeway off-ramps. The study was, as you'll hear in about 30 seconds, the study was done in part at the behest of the area neighborhoods who are concerned about the effect of the ramps on their neighborhood.
Okay, John.
Should we jump in?
Yeah,
okay.
Jump right in.
So a little bit of background, like Russell said, this has been something that for decades has been an issue where this neighborhood has had freeway off-ramp that literally cuts it in half, and it creates, it's noisy, it's not very attractive, it creates a barrier as far as being able to conveniently travel, especially by walking or biking throughout the neighborhood. And so we were able to procure some funds and hire a consultant to finally just take a look at what it would take, what the options are. And this is the first time we actually were able to engage with UDOT, who owns the ramp, on what different options would be for this, reconfiguring this ramp. And so with that, Jeff Golden managed this project.
And Mr. Chairman, I cut in the items that Jeff is going to refer to are tacked onto the staff report and are also in the transmittal.
Thank you.
Okay. So for this study, this was basically it was a data gathering study where we looked at several options to determine what might be potentially feasible with the 900 South ramp. So we had a project team and a project steering committee. I can get in that in a little bit, but what we wanted to do is we wanted to try to figure out how many different alternatives there could be in the ballpark area there to modify, shorten, or realign the 900 South ramp. We thought of as many different things as we could. We came up with a handful of scenarios that we thought carried some weight. We took those scenarios to the steering committee. Steering committee included UDOT. UDOT was along at the table for this project the entire way. Also included folks from the planning division and RDA, as well as us in the transportation division. We had as John talked about, we had money to look at 3 scenarios in detail. So the steering committee selected the 3 scenarios that they thought would be the best to look at in a specific amount of detail. And when I'm talking about detail, I'm talking about traffic engineering. So it was really it was really purely a technical study. So we looked at the traffic impacts for existing conditions as well as 2040 conditions. We followed the UDOT standards. We looked at the operations at the intersections. We looked at the queuing onto the freeway and all of those types of things. So is that a good enough background, or should we get into the options, or is there?
Yeah, and I would just add that when we talked about this with UDOT, we like as a viable option, just complete elimination of the ramp, that should be considered. UDOT made that very clear that they wouldn't participate really in any way if we had that as an option. And so we didn't analyze that. It was closed for a few months, a few years back for maintenance, and so we were able to gather some data. But when Jeff mentioned the traffic study following UDOT standards, basically one of their requirements was that any scenarios be analyzed in a way to mitigate the traffic impacts so that any reconfiguration of the ramp wouldn't push traffic to adjacent ramps. So that was an important criteria for them.
So,
A quick question. So before we get into the different options, how, as far as UDOT goes, how were they as a partner? And I ask that, with Foothill Drive bisecting District 6 and understanding, how much of an impact UDOT projects and UDOT managed roads have in the city and how tied our hands really are. With some of the options that you're going to go through, how realistic do you think those are? I mean, was this UDOT kind of patting you on the head and saying, oh, that's a cute idea? Or is it something that they're actually, that they may truly be interested in looking at?
yeah, UDOT was a very good partner on this study. We were very happy to have them engaged, attending all of the meetings with us, reviewing all of the detailed traffic analysis, which again we did to their level, to their desire. So they were very good, reviewed all of that. They brought multiple people to some of the meetings. They provided comments in a lot of the study. So they were a good partner. We were really glad to have them at the table, like John talked about. Really one of the first times that we were able to have them at the table to talk about this. With that being said, it is a UDOT facility. UDOT owns it, UDOT controls it, and UDOT has no plans to do anything with this.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Yeah, I'm excited to have the results of this study after the community has been contemplating this question for over a decade before I was on the council, which is that this is a particularly long off-ramp. When you look at the I-15 corridor, it kind of goes along for a ways, and it divides the Central Ninth from the ballpark neighborhoods pretty robustly. And the question that, or I should back up to say that the community was asking the city council to fund a study, which is what we did, to sit down with UDOT and contemplate other iterations of the off-ramp, or if UDOT was willing to say goodbye to it, which we knew they weren't, but we had to ask, right?
Right.
And so I think this is an exciting bunch of information and data collection that happened as an answer to the community. And I just want to reiterate what Jeff was saying, that if you look at the scenarios, there's some areas that have hatched marks or blue boxes that would be land that would have to be acquired to do these other scenarios, and no one it's UDOT required that we acknowledge those needs in the scenario contemplation, but there is absolutely no proposal in here. It's really just great for the community to be able to see what it would take in order to have that kind of a conversation. And back to the impetus from the community perspective of creating greater connectivity between the neighborhoods, could you guys speak to maybe any of those takeaways from the process we've just been through, or opportunities, given the ramp as it is and as it probably will remain? Did you find in that conversation with UDOT or as just the city administration some opportunities for connection?
Sure. I'll jump in and then you can. So Jeff can talk about a little overview of the actual scenarios. The bottom line is that unless you're able to, and even then it shifts impacts, anything that we do to this ramp, we recognize that it's been a longstanding major impact to this neighborhood, but any modifications basically just shifts the impact somewhere else. A full elimination of the ramp pushes it to other ramps, and so in some ways it would actually be less impactful, but that's kind of it's a non-starter. But other things that could be done relatively short-term are things that could help improve the north-south connectivity through this ramp. So Third West, that's one of the major projects on the streets bond, and we're going through the process right now that will completely reimagine that to make it much more safe and comfortable for walking and biking. Second West is another street that could be looked at in the underpass, maybe seeing what could be done to make that a better community space. And then we'd like to look at a variety of other options in and around the ramps to not only improve the permeability, the north-south connectivity, but then also just from like a attractiveness standpoint to make it so it doesn't feel like such an ominous weight on the neighborhood. But I don't know if Jeff has some details on the actual scenarios, if you want to talk through any of the...
Yes, please.
And that was a good overview. I can get in, I can follow up with some of the transportation engineering information. Again, getting back to this being the first time that we really looked at it and we gathered a whole bunch of data, we know now how many vehicles use that. We know where the vehicles are going. So it provides us opportunity, including having this dialogue with UDOT, it provides us opportunities in the short term to make modifications that will help the neighborhood, it will help traffic, in Salt Lake City, as well as transit, bicycle, and pedestrian access. So, for example, the intersection of 900 South and West Temple, where the ramp touches down, UDOT knows that there's problems with that intersection in the sense that if we had the opportunity to make some sort of minor changes to the northbound right turns there, we could do that. We just happen to be going through right now and designing and building improvements along 900 South. So we'll work with UDOT to look at doing that. We know where the traffic is going, so we know that maybe there are opportunities to clean up the area along West Temple, south of 900 South, between that and Meade. So, of all of the different things that we looked at, we talked about extending the ramp, shortening the ramp, closing the ramp. We talked about moving it to 600 West. The three that we settled on, which you guys have copies of, and I say settled on, what I mean is we moved these forward for a detailed analysis where we looked at them with micro simulation models for traffic analysis. We also had the civil engineer look at them for a layout. The scenario A is moving the ramp to 300 West. So the ramp would touch down at 300 West. Some of the benefits of that is it provides the greatest reduction in ramp length. So it shortens the ramp the most of the alternatives that we looked at. Some of the major drawbacks to that is that it affects a rail spur that UTA actually owns that crosses 300 West at about 10 South. I'll go through the different...
Chris was so surprised about that.
I was trying to remember what I said that caused so much alarm. The other scenario that we looked at is connecting the ramp, relocating it, connecting it over to 400 West, and it would touch down at 800 South as opposed to 900 South. 900 South we're prioritizing for different modes. That's going to be one of our frequent transit networks, as well as we're going to have the urban trail, the shared use path on the south side of the road. So we would want it to fly over 900 South and touch down at 800 South. As you can imagine, there are complications with that as well. The benefit to this scenario is that it provides the greatest amount of land that could be developed, greatest amount of land where the ramp currently is that would now be open land. But it has pretty substantial impacts along 400 West, and it also is impacted by the UTA, potential for a UTA rail extension. And then the final scenario that we looked at, and then I'll try to answer questions and discuss these in more detail. But the final scenario we looked at is a combination of the two. And that is where you provide a connection to 300 West, but you also provide a connection up 400 west to 800 south. That operates the best from a transportation perspective because it separates the traffic. The roadways can be smaller, so the impacts to the adjacent properties would be smaller.
Great. Excuse me. So questions from the council on these options? Councilmember Mendenhall.
Okay. One of the interesting parts of the study is the percentage from the flow of the off-ramp and on-ramp. I'm not seeing it in here, but I know it was on the packet we looked at earlier. Oh, there it is, page 5. And how little the southbound route is used, only 8% in the morning. And so if you look at that curve, the curve in the ramp there before it gets to 9th South, I think that if UDOT would be interested in expanding a conversation about adjusting that piece of it, then there could, and whether or not they want to preserve that piece of land, that we could have some interesting development opportunities to activate the area right there where there's currently a really underutilized ramp. And I also want to mention, council members, that in your red packets are 2 letters from 2 of the community members who've been asking for this study and supporting the study. One is from Bill Davis, the other is from Jesse Hulse. And as you all know, Jesse Hulse from Atlas Architects at Central 9th, and he articulates a couple of the concerns, which I don't think necessarily need to be remedied by the removal of the ramp, but around the dead ends and the blight that creates, around the unused berms on the sides of the ramp that maybe could be better activated, the walking routes being limited, fairly limited, and under a pretty wide viaduct that could be better lighted or activated with art. And that reminds me of the Granary mural project that we funded fairly recently. And several other really legitimate concerns that the community council and the community has about this ramp cutting through the area. But I think that while this was just an analysis and not a policy recommendation, it brings up some insightful opportunities for future conversations that we could have in just the city, but also I think with UDOT and the community. So I hope this isn't the end of this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Mendenhall. Councilmember Valdemoros.
So, I just had a question. As you were saying, well, UDOT is not interested in doing any of this. Is that what you said earlier? Like, they're not interested in changing anything from...
They're happy mostly with how it is. And I think, if anything, they want to extend it up to 8th South. But yeah, so any changes would have to be city initiated and city funded, or funded by some other source probably.
Yeah, the UDOT, over 60% of the traffic that uses the ramp, we measured this, goes to the downtown or downtown east area. So from a regional transportation perspective, this is an important ramp. It's an important piece of UDOT's infrastructure. They like the idea of getting people from their regional freeway system close to the downtown and downtown east area, which this ramp right now does a good job of. So that's where they're coming from.
For us, what are our next steps after this? What are the next steps for all of us?
Yeah, I think that's something that we'll have to figure out together, and something we're going to be going to the community councils in the next month. And it's a conversation I think that absolutely needs to continue as far as what we do from here. I think this study makes it clear that in the short term, medium term, ramp it's going to be around for a while. And so we'd really like to look at like some of the things that Councilmember Mendenhall mentioned as far as some other options that we could start working on today to make it better. And if long term we want to continue that conversation of what could be done here. You know, I mean, we'll be here and happy to keep looking at and analyzing ideas and options and continue the dialogue. Yeah.
Great. Councilmember Wharton.
So I saw in the transmittal that there was looked at a tunnel option, but that was determined not to be viable just because of cost, I'm guessing, or?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons that it was not selected to move forward by the steering committee to be evaluated in detail. We had the opportunity to evaluate 3 scenarios in detail with this detailed traffic analysis, and the tunnel removes traffic from a lot of those intersections. So that was one of the reasons that we also chose to analyze scenarios that we'd be able to look at what the traffic impacts were. There are some other issues with the tunnel, the cost. And it's mentioned in here, I believe, as one of the disadvantages, but UDOT indicated to us that if we were to tunnel the ramp where it currently exists today, which actually we call it a tunnel, but it would be much simpler than a tunnel. If we were to do that, it would be more of a cut and cover. So we would just cut it, cap it. UDOT indicated to us through this study that the land on top of that tunnel, I'm going to refer to it as a tunnel, the land on top of that tunnel would still belong to UDOT, and they wouldn't allow us to develop on top of it. We could do something like a park or something like that, but we wouldn't be able to do things like buildings and private development on it.
Councilmember Johnston.
Thanks for the lead, Councilmember Wharton. I'm being serious when I bring up the undergrounding piece. I understand that UDOT would have the land and they restrict what it would be used for, but if we broaden this to I-15 and the ramps, it could transform the city in a lot of ways. And it's more of an engineering question, right? It's not really a traffic flow so much, because you have potentially the existing traffic flow, same exits, just cut and covered, right?
Yes.
What would be, I imagine it's a little more complicated process, but to evaluate that, what would be involved just to do an evaluation of that?
We can do a detailed evaluation as you want on that. Some of the things that we can do is we can do a quick look at similar situations in the United States and around the world to look at how this is handled. We actually did a lot of those scenarios, not just the 3, but the other ones, we actually spent quite a bit of time discussing and looking at. And so the tunnel one, it actually provides a lot of good opportunity. So one of the downsides with tunnels is that the entry and exit point is usually pretty large, but you have the ability here to actually separate that on West Temple. So you could probably do it within most of the right-of-way that you have on West Temple, which is also a UDOT road. But one of the things that we could do is we could look at those types of things from a higher level. I don't know if you guys had any other comments or recommendations for that.
I mean, if money wasn't an issue, that would probably be the best option that could keep everyone happy. But you have maintenance issues, and I think UDOT was concerned about those. But that's...
I think expanding that to the entirety of I-15 would make a lot of beautiful sense to me, maybe not financially yet. But it still would be a UDOT discussion and it would be a federal discussion.
Right. Yeah, and that's, you mentioned federal, so anything that touches any on or off ramp to the interstate system, any change requires Federal Highway Administration approval. But yeah, I mean, that's an interesting idea.
Any other thoughts or questions? Thank you for your work on this. It is something that we hear about regularly, and I know that as a council we've talked about this in the past about doing something. I do think that we have UDOT is going to be a significant hurdle on anything we do. Not just because of what we currently have works for them, but because of the funding that would be required for it. So. But what this does do is it gives us opportunities so that when work needs to be done and that needs to be rebuilt, that we could then go back and push some things with them so that it can be done right that time. So thank you for your work on this. It really is important.
Sure. And I'll just add, with as far as the UDOT coordination, they are, I'm really impressed with their current leadership, and I feel like they're trying really hard to change some of their standards and their culture to be better at listening to the needs of the community. And where we're at now with them, which I think is actually quite a bit further ahead than we were 10, 20 years ago, is that they're willing to explore almost any option with us as long as it doesn't remove a lane of traffic. And so, we're moving in the right direction. And so
Right.
I think some of these other options and ideas that we're talking about, they're probably more open than they would have been even 10 years ago.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your work on this. That is the only item that we have on our agenda. I'll look to the executive director, Cindy, for any announcements. That's okay. I don't know if we do. I have no announcements. Okay, so one item to report on from the chair and vice chair. I attended the Mill Creek City Council meeting last night, where their city council and mayor unanimously approved the interlocal that we approved last week, related to the boundary adjustments between Salt Lake City and Mill Creek. So I just want to thank all of you for your work. Thank the administration as well for the work over the past few months. Now the annexation, that clock started last week when we passed it. So there's a 60-day time period for that process to continue. But as far as the work between both cities for the interlocal, that was taken care of last night. So just wanted to give you all an update on that. James, do you have any?
The county council voted 6-3. Oops. County council voted 6-3 to deny the North Salt Lake annexation.
So that's good. That issue's not going to go away. I think as a city, we're going to have to really look at how to position ourselves moving forward so that we are not cut out of that discussion, because whatever happens will have significant impact on that neighborhood. Councilmember Mendenhall.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair, for acting on the city's behalf to communicate with the county council and make them aware of the consequences that would have resulted for Salt Lake City and our taxpayers if they would have approved that annexation. Thank you for taking that initiative.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions or comments, we will adjourn, and I will immediately convene the formal session of the Salt Lake City Council. This is a limited formal meeting that we'll have for Tuesday, September 24th, 2019. I need to look to the recorders to see if there's anything that we need to do. Okay, so we're good to go. On this item, we will do a very quick opening ceremony. There's your opening ceremony. Public hearings, we do not have any public hearings. We have one potential action item, which is an ordinance and resolution for Block 67.
Mr. Chair. Whoa, this,
I know, see?
jeez.
Okay.
I can keep it over there and you guys can hear me on the recording.
Councilmember Fowler.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would move that the council approve the ordinance adopting the Block 67 North Community Reinvestment Area Project Area Plan and adopt a resolution authorizing execution of the interlocal agreement between Salt Lake City Corporation and the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City, authorizing use of a portion of tax increment for the Block 67 North CRA.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Fowler, second by Councilmember Rogers. Any discussion to this item? Councilmember Mendenhall.
Madam Chair and RDA staff, you helped us navigate what started off as a not good conversation for Salt Lake City, and with a lot of collaboration with the county partners and obviously the applicant, but really the city RDA and the county, you have navigated such a better path for Salt Lake City in this development. So thank you for that hard work.
Agreed. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. We do not have any comments, no new business, no unfinished business. I look for one motion. Consent. Councilmember Wharton makes a motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Rogers. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. The consent agenda is adopted, and we are adjourned.
And now we're going to re-adjourn as the RDA. So, well, reconvene as the RDA. Did I say re-adjourn? This is how much we're ready to be done. We reconvene this meeting, special limited meeting for the redevelopment agency. Anything else that I need to do or wait? We only have one item of business under the redevelopment agency business. It is a diversion of property tax for community reinvestment project area, Block 67 North Community Reinvestment Area Local Agreement, Salt Lake City.
Madam Chair, I move the board approve the resolution authorizing execution of interlocal agreement with Salt Lake City for a portion of tax increment for the Block 67 North Community Reinvestment Area project area.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Rogers, a second by Board Member Luke. Any discussion? I just quickly want to say thanks, Aaron. It was a team effort on everybody's part. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That is the only item of business. We are adjourned. And I think we're done.